Welcome to the Counselling Armchair, hosted by the counselling team at RMIT University. This podcast aims to help you manage your university life so you can be at your best. We'll be sharing with you tips on student life here and ways to enhance your mental well-being.
Hi everyone. Today we're going to talk about a very common issue that many students face, especially as they're approaching graduation and about to go out into the world to work in their field of expertise. You may have heard of this term but not known what it means. We are, of course, talking about imposter syndrome. Joining us today is Senior Coordinator and Counsellor Lyndon Medina. Hi Lyndon, welcome to the Counselling Armchair.
Hi Liz. Thanks very much. This is a great opportunity to speak about an important subject.
Yeah, for sure. So great to have you. I reckon we should just start because the idea of this podcast is also just for our listeners to get to know us a little bit more. So Lyndon, would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, just in short, I've been at the RMIT Counselling Service since 2003. So I'm on my 19th year.
Wow.
And I really enjoyed doing the individual counselling and having access to the different students from different schools. And you'd see, it's interesting, you'd see the imposter syndrome coming through regardless of the studies.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and the 19 years is a good innings, isn't it, to have had a good range of experiences. Yeah. Oh, well, that's wonderful, Lyndon.
We're feeling very privileged to have you with us today, Lyndon, given your time at the Counselling Service, and you would have seen a number of students come through and working with them.
Yes. I'm hoping me being here shows that shows the authenticity, and even sometimes you could feel fake, but still kind of appear anyway.
Well, thanks for that. And on that note, what is it? What is imposter syndrome?
Yeah, there are those there are official definitions, but if I think of one word to describe it, it'll be about self-doubt. Yeah, it's about self-doubt, about one's capability. If you're looking at the more scientific definition, let's go with the originators in 1978. I'll read something here because I don't want to misrepresent it. It's an intense feeling of intellectual inauthenticity that's frequently experienced by high-achieving individuals. But in my experience, not only high-achieving individuals really experience imposter syndrome, but also students, and I'll talk a little bit about the studies, and it's very, very common. So it's not only high-achieving individuals. Then if you look at the Wikipedia kind of definition, it's about a psychological construct or phenomenon where people are unable to internalize their accomplishment. That's an important they're unable to internalize their accomplishment despite there's evidence to the contrary. Right?
Yes.
So I think you got to get those three definitions: self-doubt, feeling of inauthenticity, and inability to internalize despite evidence that you are okay and successful.
Wow, those are all very good points. I think that really do capture exactly what imposter syndrome is about, and I can see why therefore it affects not just high achieving students but anyone beginning something new, like entering into a profession. How does it affect people, Lyndon?
It affects them in lots of ways. I've just done some preparation to it.
Good.
Let me have a look. How does it affect everyone? Well, it affects your confidence. It's one thing. It affects your self-esteem. It affects your trust in yourself. Where is it? See, when you need it, you can't find it.
You can't put your fingers on it.
Oh, here we go. Well, it holds us back. And then it's kind of detracts us from our goals. So if we have a goal and we have imposter syndrome, well, I'm not actually good enough. So what's the point of going through it? And then if you kind of draws it back, it also then start to control our lives with that emotions attached to not being good enough or self-doubt. And that that also affects our behavior. or action
Yeah,
toward.
right.
And then it also makes us difficult to relax. It takes a lot
Yeah.
of energy to kind of think, well, I'm a fraud, or I'm not good enough, or yeah, all those things. And although it's not a mental health condition, long enough it makes you susceptible to mental health condition. Imagine if you're walking around that I'm a fake, I'm not good enough, and what sort of identity that would then kind of create in yourself. And it impacts on your psychological well-being. Not happy person because I can't achieve my potential, even though I've got this kind of feeling that I have, but contradictory because of the imposter syndrome. Then what do you call it? It puts doubt on your mind. Yeah.
Sounds exhausting to
Yeah.
feel that way, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it'll hinder your personal and professional development.
Yeah.
This is my ceiling point. I'm not good enough. So what's the point of even thriving? What's the point of even doing all these other courses? It's just internally,
Yep.
I'm just not good enough. And finally, I think the important part is that it reinforces that sense of false self. It
Right.
reinforces that rather than challenging that.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is where I am.
Do you mean that false self as in being like I'm a fraud, like I don't actually know what I'm doing? They gave me this degree, and that means that I'm supposed to know what I'm doing, but actually I think I don't know what I'm doing, and I have to hide that from other people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, so you hide that. I mean, there's a real capability at the background of it because there's the evidence, but you're negating that.
Yeah.
What you're presenting is I'm a fraud, I'm not good enough. And
yeah, makes sense. So even though you might be like kicking goals and actually doing really well, you just can't accept that. You can't recognize that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
that's
interesting.
tough.
I mean, the originators were two academics, high achieving academics. They had their PhD, and if despite that, they felt that they weren't good enough, and probably in the 1970s that also it came in context. Women at the time were not as seen as were suppressed to some degree. So that came, but more and more studies shows that there's actually no significant differences between genders and sexes.
Yeah, men and women equally affected by it. Yeah, got it.
Yeah.
It certainly sounds like it can get in the way of, I guess, one's capacity, one's learning, one's potential. But also sounds like from what you describe as parts of it where it's so easily fused with one's identity, like part of our identity, or we identify with it. And that can also, then it affects our functioning and impairs our sort of potential or functioning or overall well-being, as you described.
Yeah, I think that's a danger zone when it becomes fused with your identity, because then you're then kind of hiding that real self, and then you're presenting that I'm just not, this is me, I'm not good enough. Yeah.
As you described this, so is imposter syndrome a bad thing to have?
Well, I think it's not a bad thing, but it's not a bad thing per se, but it's a bad thing if you don't do anything about it. I think it's a bad thing. It's normal to have it, but then you need to reframe it. It is, what does this tell me? If I'm feeling this kind of like a fraud, I'm feeling not good enough, what can I do about it? And what I can do about it is about, well, I need to find out a little bit more. I need to develop my resource. I need to kind of skill up, which will go on later on. So if you just digest it, that I have it, then it's bad for you.
So it gets in the way. And I'm thinking like it doesn't just affect obviously, people studying in academia and or, graduating, but I imagine even like people in sports or athletes or pro athletes as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like
Absolutely.
In all walks of life, we do experience this.
Yes, yeah. I mean, since the 1970s, 1978, when the first studies comes, almost every year there are studies that looks at imposter syndrome. It's been found with academics, teachers, bankers, nurses, health professionals, physicians, psychologists, even college students and primary school students. And as you said,
Wow.
even kind of
Okay.
sports people. So every year there's studies about on imposter syndrome. And within RMIT, I've seen it quite frequently with the education, the teachers, for example.
Yep.
But all the third years are even quite common. All these technical skills that I have. What good do I have? Is this enough?
Mm.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's
Sounds
when
like
it started to
no
come
one's
show.
not covered here, as in,
No.
everyone's covered under this
Yeah.
umbrella that we can all experience at some point this imposter syndrome.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
one stat show it's 70%.
Yeah.
70% of
70%.
70% of
Wow.
successful people will experience feelings of imposter syndrome. But as I
Interesting.
mentioned, it's not only successful people.
Yeah.
So then you'll add that the people are in transition or studying, let's say, then kind of I think that will boost the stats then in a way.
Yeah, just goes to show how super common it
Yeah.
is, and it is something that maybe everyone can expect to experience to some degree, as they're transitioning out of education and into their career, sort of thing. And you mentioned that there's that sort of self-doubt is a big sort of part of defining it, and I'm imagining also a lot of comparison, like people will look at other
Yeah.
people in their field and go, oh my God, that person's brilliant. What do I know, kind of thing, and maybe
Yeah.
that's one of the things that sort of feeds it a little bit. That
Yeah.
comparing yourself to others. What
Absolutely.
do you think characterizes people who have it? Like, why, if I've got imposter syndrome, why do I have it? How would you sort of
Why do you
characterize?
have it? Like in
Yeah,
terms
like
of the
What do
cause
you
or-
reckon some of the underlying sort of causes are? I suppose of what lead.
Yeah. I haven't found in the literature causality, but there has been some correlational
Okay,
studies. And
interesting.
as you mentioned, one of those is that if growing up in comparison, if comparison is quite broad, look at your cousin who they're doing dentistry
Yeah.
or something like that. And so the implied message is that you're never as good as them. Right? You're never going to be as good as them unless you do these kind of course. And sometimes in a family there are those favored courses, and only if you're doing those creates that status.
Yeah, only if you're a doctor or a lawyer.
Yeah. Yeah, doctor, lawyer,
Is that acceptable?
architect.
Yeah. Yep. I see what you're saying.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so if you're growing up on that comparison, and it's not only cousins, or it could be in the siblings within that family. So that's one of those kind of risk factors, I guess. And
I
there
reckon
are others. Go
Yeah,
on.
I was just going to say, I reckon teachers do it too sometimes, like, look at Johnny, he's so good, and like,
Yeah.
which is a lovely thing for Johnny, but then the rest of the kids in the class are going, oh, what about me?
Yeah.
I must be if he's good, then I'm not good,
Yeah.
so that comparison that comes in. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. The system, I think, will also influences that, looks at what they need to be strong as in academic, let's say, and then we kind of look at their deficit rather than, well, for each student, what are their kind of strengths in a way,
Yeah.
fostering that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So even beliefs is another one, beliefs that, in order to, real success means that you've worked hard for it. Right? You would have suffered for it, but if you've done it easy, that means it wasn't really worth attaining.
Like you didn't earn it, you don't deserve it.
Yeah. So if it came easy, then it wasn't difficult. It kind of negates that you actually, it still kind of required effort to it. Yeah. And alongside that comparison is the scripts that you might receive from your upbringing, scripts from on how you should be able to cope with different things. So that means you're not allowed to struggle. You're not allowed to kind of, once again, it's that kind of belief. Yeah.
Yeah.
Lack of reinforcement or accomplishment. There's no validation. You got 80%, or you could do better than that. So those messages in a way, well, what about 95%? Or you get 95%, what happened to the other 5%? Those kind of scripts that you remember.
Yeah. All those early childhood formative experiences that sort of orient your thinking in a certain direction, either towards comparing yourself to others or believing that, if it comes too easy, it's not worth it, or, I need to work really, really hard, or maybe the opposite. Maybe it's like, if I have to work really, really hard, then I'm not good enough, I'm not talented enough.
That's right.
Might be another belief, mightn't it, that can sort of impact.
It could swing the other way, but irrespective, it's about negating that you've achieved something. Because,
right, exactly. Yeah. And what do you think about the role of mistakes? Like, because I think I was telling someone the other day that I think the pathway to success is littered with failure. In fact, we know that, making mistakes is really valuable. It's how you learn. But I think we have a real low tolerance for making mistakes, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I hadn't come across that in the literature, imposter syndrome, but I could see how that would kind of, if you made a mistake and you're not able to adjust to it, it could either reinforce what you see, it proves that I'm not good. And what you were saying is that if you're able to reframe that, well, you can learn. There's not a successful person there who's not made a mistake and learned from it.
100%. Yeah.
I'm hearing that what you're describing there, Lyndon, is that we're not born with this, like none of us are really, like, as in born with the, susceptibility to the imposter syndrome or the false self, but that we learn, like as Liz, you're talking about, even also mistakes, like we've learned mistakes are bad, or we learn it's not okay to make mistakes. Similarly, we're learning that we've got to be performing at a certain level, or perfecting at a certain level, or be good or competent. And the scripts that you're referring to, or our environment, all of that are learning over our experiences that stack up over time and then builds this sense of imposter syndrome.
Yeah. I mean, I've not seen any genetic predisposition, but there has been some studies that links anxiety. If you've got sensitivity to evaluation and fear of failure, I think that mistake, it's been kind of linked with development of imposter syndrome. And some personality traits have been found. So there's positive correlation between imposter syndrome and introversion.
Oh,
so
interesting.
People who might be skewed towards that being an introvert. And the argument there is that introverts hide the aspect of their personality hidden in the world. It's not showing. So that reservation perhaps then, maybe that then kind of breeds some, I'm not, people perceive them as then, because they're not contributing, then maybe then they internalize that aspect of it. Yeah. So similarly, I think you like this one, Liz, which is the narcissism features.
Yes.
In terms, when validation of the self is lacking in the family, the child may compensate by trying to live up to an idealized image.
Yeah, Lyndon's referring to, we often have a chat about narcissistic traits and how they can be challenging to work with there. So, that idealizing sort of, that trait, and perfectionism I'm hearing, in what you're saying as well, right? And we know perfectionism is a factor in anxiety and would also be a factor here in imposter syndrome. So that, I reckon, that would account for the correlation a little bit too.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. Perfectionism. And the last one that I've got was placating behaviors.
Oh, interesting.
So by kind of pleasing others, consequentially is that you compromise yourself.
Yes.
Right? Because you're kind of subservient to another's needs.
Yes.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, fascinating. Yeah. I call that the disease to please.
Right. That's right.
I like it
Good
because
catchy one.
I like it because it rhymes. The disease to
does.
please. But, it's just to capture that idea that, like pleasing can become pathological sometimes, where you
That's right.
just,
Absolutely.
you put your own needs and wants aside so much to try to please others that it actually hurts you. It's actually detrimental to you.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you lose your sense of self if if I continue if I exist just to please you, where am I in that?
Where am I?
Yeah.
I become invisible, right?
Yeah.
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 Yeah, makes sense.
So it sounds like there are a few sort of, certain groups of people that this can affect, or certain groups of people are more susceptible to it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Are there any that we've missed so far? Other groups of people who might be more susceptible to it?
I mean, so far that's what that I'm sure there's more, but I haven't covered
Okay.
all the literature. I wouldn't be
But that's okay.
surprised in terms there are some other predisposition to getting the imposter syndrome.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Lyndon, I think that our listeners would be curious, and I'm curious. Have you ever experienced imposter syndrome, and what was it like for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think graduating on the fourth year, being out there now, you gotta practice. It's horrible. I mean, it's a horrible feeling because I want the skills now.
Yeah.
But in retrospect, or even in that moment, I can't have that skills that I needed because part of the process is learning.
Yes. Learning on the
Once,
job.
yeah, and once I was able to embrace that there's a gap between what I still needed to learn anyway, but that doesn't mean that I'm an imposter. So being able to kind of, it just means I haven't got all the skills as yet.
That sounds like a really powerful learning that you were able to make, Lyndon, where you sort of recognise that there is learning on the job, and that no one expects you to actually come fully formed when you start a profession. That actually, we know that people that are entering into a profession are going to have to come up in their skills, and there's a tolerance for that in the workplace, in actual fact. And so you could be a bit more patient with yourself, it sounds like, to allow yourself to sort of catch up on the skills that you needed.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's an important skill important that you need to be compassionate with yourself.
Yeah.
I'm reminded of this visual, I guess a visual image or an analogy when you describe this about, a video game, like let's say Super Mario. Everyone knows Super Mario. Yeah. And you've got to actually get through the first stage before you can get to the second stage.
Yes.
And so for people, let's say, who are graduating, newly graduates, you're just at one stage.
Yes.
You've got to get to this stage before you get to the next stage.
Nice
you can't
one.
save the princess until you finish that stage, that sort of stuff. But then each time you start again, let's say, because you've run out of lives, but once you start again, you get better or quicker at finishing that stage. And then so that builds that competency, and then you get to the stage a little bit quicker next time, so it builds on that each time.
I really like that. I love that metaphor. That's a really fantastic way of explaining it, isn't it, of like what actually happens in terms of development in a career and as a professional in your field.
You get better and better each level as well, isn't it? I think that's a key thing with the imposter syndrome. It's transient. Or you're in transition to something. It's not static.
Yeah.
That you will move as long as you move.
Yes, as long as you keep moving. And as you said earlier, Lyndon, actually stopping to reflect on and recognise your achievements and what you're doing well, because I think as a society and as a general rule, we have such a negative bias. We're always looking for what's wrong, like the news that we listen to every night. It should be called the bad news because it's always bad news, right? And so how can we not have a negative bias towards ourselves as well?
Absolutely.
But maybe, we just have to sort of go, oh, yeah, that was actually okay. And I have to say, because I certainly experienced imposter syndrome when I started my career as well. So this is all very familiar to me. That feeling of like, oh, my God, they gave me this degree and I'm supposed to be a professional, but I feel like I don't know what I'm doing. It certainly had that feeling in the beginning. But, yeah, over time, what I learned to do that was helpful for me was to just start to observe myself and what I was doing well and actually sort of celebrate those little wins and go, I actually think, I made plenty of mistakes as well. Let's not forget that. But which I learned from. But, but to also just sort of stop and go, oh, actually, I'm pretty happy with how that went. I'm pretty happy with how, what my improvement, now that I'm on the next level of Mario kind of thing, So, I think that's a really good point as well about, stopping to appreciate what you have achieved.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And as you were describing that before, Lyndon, about that compassion, it was really helpful to be able to. I think not many of it's hard to sort of say that not many of us haven't experienced imposter syndrome at some point in our career. So I myself as well, and then kind of returning to do my master's, it was a revisit of that imposter syndrome all over again, right? And then, but as you were saying, describing about that compassion, it was like, oh wow, but I had to learn a lot of those other stuff early on, and it's okay to be grateful. Like I like Liz, you were saying, to be appreciative. I actually was really grateful that I had those earlier experiences and knowing what I didn't know back then, or not enough, or it was insufficient, because it sounded like also there was a bit more of a thirst for, and curiosity for, I want to learn more about this, or I want to try work on this. So that actually helped with that, a bit of motivation to go and explore, aspects of the work or aspects of certain things or skills that I didn't know. So I found that was really also good to be able to reflect on. I was like, wow, like I was so junior, I didn't know any of this. And it really makes us realize, like, oh, okay, well, also I've come a long way, but I didn't know a lot back then, and I wanted to know more back then.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if it's, I guess, imposter syndrome, if it's not maladaptive, can actually lead you to do, as you said, to be more motivated, to fill those skill deficits, to identify what they are and to fill them, and to not be afraid to ask for help, and certainly not pretend I know everything, but instead say, actually, I don't know that. How can I learn about that? And that's it's okay to do that, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Lyndon, do you have any, as I guess you've started talking a little bit about, things I can do to, manage my imposter syndrome, or what I can do about it? Do you, like, when you talk about this with clients or other students, or even maybe just in general private practice, do you have certain hot tips that you share with others, clients, about what we can do with imposter syndrome, or what else we can do with imposter syndrome?
Yeah, I think the first thing is to identify and name it. This is what I've got. This is what I'm feeling. I'm feeling not good enough, or I'm feeling like a fraud, or it appears in different guises. I feel like a fraud. I feel like a fake, or something like that. I don't have the skills. And then then knowing when it triggers. At what point does it triggers? Does it triggers when you have a certain task? Right? Or in the past, it would trigger for me when I would see students with PhD. I would say they're much better than I, right? So you kind of know where it triggers, and often it's not everywhere, right? There'll be specific things. Then even that, you start to kind of isolate it, right? And once you isolate it, you start to work through it. You look at the other side of the coin, which is to cherish and celebrate also your strengths. Right? So it's not a totality of it. There are things that I'm skill deficit in, reframing that imposter syndrome, but there are things that I'm really good at.
Yeah.
So not forgetting that, and then keep working on those things. That these are some of the things that I need to improve on. And one of the things that I've found evidence-based is that deliberate practice. You know, it takes 10,000 hours or 10-year rule to master something. Ever since I've discovered that, you know, it's just never no turning back. And anytime that I don't know anything, I might read 100 articles on that or something like that, or listen to the different podcasts. And by the end of it, I know it.
Yeah.
I know a little bit more. You know, I've also got on the other side is that Zen beginner's mind, where I'm all, you know, I'll never get to that stage where it's perfect, and that's okay. But being Zen beginner's mind is that I'm open to learning. And the other tips within that is that having that flexibility, allow yourself to make mistake, as Liz said, and then allow yourself to grow and transform those things that you don't know. Watch out for those comparison, because the yardstick or the measurement, every time you compare, there's studies in that in comparison, it's always preloaded to you being more inferior.
Interesting.
Yes.
The moment that you compare, it's loaded that someone's better than you.
Yes.
Interesting.
There
Yes.
seems to be a lens focusing on the flaws or what's deficient rather than what we do have or what we've got skills in or where we're competent at.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
It's almost
there
like
was, sorry, go on, Liz. Yeah.
No, sorry, Lyndon. I was just going to say it's almost like we're very focused on what's wrong with us, but also very focused on what's right with other people. So it's just completely out of whack, isn't it? It's like I'm not looking at what's right with me. I'm only looking at what's wrong with me. And then when I compare myself to someone else, I'm only looking at what's right with them, not what's wrong with them. So it's an imbalanced picture. So that makes sense that it's preloaded. It's inevitable that when you compare yourself to somebody else, it's going to come out that you'll be inferior.
Exactly.
Yeah,
so
makes
right
sense.
from the start, you lose in a way.
Yeah. So don't do it, huh? Don't do it. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Well, sometimes I say to my clients, you cannot not compare.
Yeah, that's true.
But it's how much you invest in that comparison.
Yes.
And there's studies in positive psych in terms of happy people or even performance where the best of the best, they actually compete with themselves rather than others.
Oh, I like that.
You know, compete with the best that you can be. So one example is that one time I aimed to read 365 articles in 1 year, let's say. You know, the first year I did 35, the second year I did 65, third year was 135, and then the fifth year I was able to do 500 articles.
Oh, wow. That was a big jump.
Yeah. So I just kept competing with myself, and I didn't really care about others. In a way, I respected and appreciated that people will always be better than I, and there's always other people going to be better than them, and vice versa. But the main thing is that keep competing with yourself.
I think of an athlete's personal best when you talk about that.
Personal best, yes, that's a good one.
Every year there's a different PB for athletes, right? So I think of it, you know, that analogy there.
Yeah.
Sorry,
and
Liz?
I think, oh no, I'm so sorry. I keep talking over the top of you guys. I'm really sorry. I'm excited about this topic. No, I think what I was thinking about is that, like, better, or, you know, what's best is sort of in the eye of the beholder, right? Like there might be some objective measures of what's best, but often there isn't. Often it's just style. People have different styles, and one style is not better than another style. And thank God we all have different styles, because that's what creates variety in the workforce. Like otherwise we'd all be like robots, just all doing the same thing. Like, you know,
right. Diversity is the rule.
Right?
Yeah,
exactly. So,
and it also comes in time and context. You know, someone might be better than you now, but who knows down the track?
Yep.
You know, it's just different time and context.
Exactly. Yeah.
Other
all
tips
good
is
points.
that, you know, get a mentor, or you know, be inspired by someone, or counseling is another one, or get coaching, personal development and professional development, and even cross training. You know, when I came here, I learned about fashion. So that therefore I can talk more to students about fashion, and I didn't know anything about it. You know, now I can talk about Jimmy Choo, the shoes. You know, something like that. So
your clients have educated you.
Exactly. You know, always kind of wake up in the morning as opposed, what can I learn today? You know, what can I improve today, as opposed to, it's the same again. Yeah. But then again, you also need, well, I'm too tired. I need a break. You also have that room. Don't burn yourself out.
100%.
So in summary, it's a bit about, I guess my takeaway from this is starting to really name it, label it, call it. For me, it would be calling it for what it is, and for me, it's my takeaway from this is then it allows me to change my script with myself. We're always comparing. There's always going to be some form of comparison. But if I allow myself to change that script from that previously where it got so internalized about my deficiency or deficits or flaws or not good enough or that false ceiling, I can now change the script to perhaps, well, what more can I learn from, or where can I go with this in terms of further skills or capacity or potential? And using resources or materials, like resources as you talked about with the mentoring, and or peers, or just being able to talk about that with somebody else also helps.
Absolutely. Yeah. And even when you said I'm not good enough, if I've given you a word to say that again, but add the word yet.
Nice.
How powerful that is.
Yeah.
I'm not good enough yet.
Yeah.
I
suppose I'm not good enough. It's
yeah,
doesn't it?
It does.
It change. Yeah. I'm not
like
good enough yet. It's more dynamic as an absolute. I'm not good enough. That's it. Period.
Yes.
I like it.
Yeah.
That's a good
empowering.
tip.
Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe just the final tip is, as I was talking to you, kind of, if you imagine a coin, one side in terms of imposter syndrome, one side of the coin is self-doubt. Right, but remember, there's two sides to the coin. So the other side is growth.
Nice.
So you got to look at both sides of the coin. Self-doubt is actually the opposite of that, is growth. If you just stay on one side, you're not going to see the other.
I like it. Yeah.
So I'm happy to be an imposter because I will grow from it each time.
Yep.
That's fantastic.
Yep.
I feel much more ready to face the world with those tips. So it's good. Well, thanks for joining us today, Lyndon, and helping us learn some more about imposter syndrome and what we can do about it. And so if this is an issue that's affecting you and you want to talk to someone about it, so feel free to book in to see a counsellor, and we can support you with this or any other concern that you might have.
Yeah, and
Thanks
it's been
again.
a pleasure. And absolutely, any other students who wants to also reach out, I'm happy to talk to them about the imposter syndrome, especially if they're feeling it.
That would be fabulous, Lyndon.
That's wonderful.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Yvonne. Thank you, Liz.
Take
Bye,
care.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks for joining us today on the Counselling Armchair. We hope you enjoyed today's episode and learned a useful thing or two. Have a great week. And just remember that life can be amazing. See you next time.
Isn't life so amazing? Sometimes it can get crazy, but hey, that's okay. We've got another day to make mistakes and say sorry. There's no sense in our worry, 'cause all we can do is try our best to make it through with love.